Hey guys, Fred here, AF Math and Engineering. How's it going? We are continuing with our derivative section. We, in a previous video, talked about derivatives of polynomial functions and exponential functions, so just basic stuff using the power rule. And we are going to get into a nice little trick that is used in derivatives called the product rule. So let's get started with that. Right underneath here, I've gone ahead in pink and written the definition of what the product rule is. And it's a good idea. I know when you're looking through your textbook and you see definitions like this with f of x and g of x and all these notations, that it can get a little bit confusing, but it's beneficial that you do start to understand the meaning of these proofs and these notations, because when you get into like calculus 3 differential equations, you'll have a lot of different notation style proofs that you're going to have to learn that your teacher might teach to you. So it's best to take a look at this at least and get familiar with it. So what do we have here? Well, we have the definition, and I'll just read it out for you. So you have d by dx of f of x times g of x. So what that means is you have two functions, f of x times g of x, and you're going to take the derivative of the product of those two functions with respect to x, okay? And essentially how we do that, it's pretty simple actually. We're going to take f of x, all right, and we're going to multiply it by the derivative of with respect to x of g of x, plus g of x with the derivative with respect to x of f of x, okay? So that might sound confusing, but it's actually quite simple, and we'll do a couple example problems and we'll show you the more hands-on application of how to do it. So let's get started with the first one. So question 1, we have f of x equals x times e to the x, okay? So what you're gonna look for right off the bat when looking for which rule to apply is if you have two functions that are multiplied by each other. So you have two terms, and each term, or it could be three terms, each term has an x or a variable in it, all right? So with that being said, we're going to take a look at the first question. We see that we have x times e to the x. So we have two functions in here, and they're both functions of x, so that means that we can apply the product rule. So all we're going to do, okay, is we're going to take the derivative of the first term, and we're going to multiply it by the second term, and then we're going to add the derivative of the second term times the first term. Simple enough. And we are going to start by writing f prime of x, signifying that this is the derivative, and we're going to take the derivative of the first term, x, okay, and the derivative of x is just 1, so we're going to be left with e to the x, all right, plus, now we're going to take the derivative of the second term, e to the x, and as we discussed in an earlier video, the derivative of e to the x is always just e to the x. So this is just going to remain the same. Derivative of the second term times the first term is going to be x e to the x. And if we want to simplify further, which your professor may ask you to, we can factor out e to the x. And we can say that it's 1 e to the x, or e to the x times 1 plus x. And that is going to be our answer for the first one. Product rule, guys, is fairly straightforward and simple. It can get a little bit tricky when they start throwing in strange functions and stuff like that, but we're just gonna focus on two questions here. After these, you should be good to go. Let's move on to the second question. We have g of x is equal to x cubed plus 2x times e to the x. So we're going to go ahead, we don't really need to expand this at all. We can just take the derivative of the bracket as 1 and apply the product rule just like we did before. So let's get started with that. So we have g prime of x, all right? And what we're going to do is we're going to take the derivative of the first term. So the entire first term is what's in the brackets, and then multiply it by e to the x. So let's do that. So we have, what's the derivative of x cubed? Well, that's 3x squared, right? Using the power rule from before, we're going to take the 3 down, and then we're going to subtract 1 from the power. So we're going to have 3x to the 3 minus 1, which is 2. And the derivative of 2x is just 2, right? Because this becomes a 0 here. So let's go ahead and write that. So we have 2 times e to the x, and we're going to add the derivative of the second term times the first one. And that's going to be exactly the same thing. Okay, very good. So we're moving along here. Forgot to write an equals there. So what can we do here to make the expression a little more simple? Well, what we can do is we can factor out this e to the x. And you will see that a lot of your professors will want you to simplify this or break it down a little more for full marks. If you don't, then they tend to take some marks off occasionally. So make sure you're always putting things in the most simple form you can. So I'm going to factor out e to the x, and both terms have e to the x in them. So we're left with 3x squared plus 2 plus x cubed plus 2x, right? And, well, how can we simplify this even further? We have nothing really that we can do, so let's just arrange them from highest power to lowest. X cubed plus 3x squared plus 2x plus 2. All right, and that is the derivative of g of x of this function. So I hope that was helpful for you. It's just an understanding how the product rule is applied and what it means. It's fairly straightforward. Not many tricks there. Come back to the next video. We're going to do quotient rule, and then we'll start putting things together. Thanks for watching, guys.